Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. We're going to get started at 6:05.
Hello, is Sophie still there? Can you test my partner, Lee, please?
Thank you so much for joining us. We'll be getting started right at 6:05. And we are also live on Facebook. And one note is if you do need closed captioning, we recommend you use the Facebook link. There will be closed captioning on the Facebook.
Nhi ca chuyện nhầm.
Hello.
Hả? Hỏi gì đó?
Well, I think it's time to get started. So welcome everyone, and thank you so much for being with us tonight on behalf of all of the Asian Pacific Islander Civic Action Network, as well as all the other co-sponsoring organizations tonight. We're so grateful that you're here with us. And we hope that tonight will be both a fruitful discussion and also the beginning of much movement building and work to come. So we're going to start just with logistics for the interpretation. As this is a multilingual space, everyone should select a language on the interpretation. So to start, if your primary language is English or you want to listen to this in English, you should still go to the interpretation icon and select English. This will make sure that you don't have gaps in your audio. And now we're going to bring up some folks to share in other languages.
如果您需要中文翻译的话，在您的视频的右下方，请点击 Interpretation， 看起来就像一个地球的符号。那第二个步骤就是选择您所需要的语言。如果需要普通话，请点选 Mandarin； 如果需要广东话，请点选 Cantonese。如果你不想听同步的英文，请點擊 Mute Original Audio。
Cho phiên dịch, điều số 1, trong thanh điều khiển, ấn nút Interpretation. Cho điều số 2, chọn ngôn ngữ mà bạn muốn nghe. Cho tiếng Việt, hãy nên ấn nút Vietnamese. Điều số 3, không bắt buộc. Để chỉ nghe bản dịch và bỏ qua bản gốc, hãy ấn nút Mute Original Audio.
Para escuchar esta presentación en español, seleccione en el fondo de su pantalla el botón que dice interpretación, en inglés interpretation, y si quiere escuchar solamente en español, seleccione la opción Mute Original Audio, lo cual pondrá en mudo el audio en inglés.
如果你係需要廣東話嘅翻譯嘅話啦，咁你喺你個畫面嘅右下角裏邊，你會見到一個好似地球咁樣嘅符號。咁跟住你撳一撳咧，就會睇到有唔同嘅語言選擇㗎。咁跟住呢一個，如果係國語嘅話咧，就係紫色㗎啦。咁黃色呢個咧就係廣東話㗎。咁你撳一撳廣東話，咁咧就可以咧就係聽到廣東話㗎。咁跟住如果你話我唔想聽到英文，我淨係聽中文嘅話咧，咁你撳一撳最後呢一個叫做 Mute Original Audio 咧，咁咧就會係淨係可以聽到廣東話嘅。
And then we'll also just share how to ask a question for all languages. So you should see a question and answer icon as well along the bottom, and that will be how we'll be collecting questions. Given the interest and the size of this event, we're obviously not going to get to all of folks' questions, but we really see this as an opening to a much longer conversation and an investment in building. So the instructions are here, but you can just type your question into the Q&A box and hit send. You can send anonymously, and we have folks who will be compiling questions and sharing some with us for the panel.
如果您想要提出问题，请打开您视频下方的 Q&A 视窗，您可以向主持人和小组成员提问，他们可以在 Q&A 的视窗中回复您，或者口头回答。在 Q&A 框中输入您的问题，然后点击 Send。请注意，如果您不想在回答中将您的姓名附加到问题中，请选 Send Anonymously。如果主持人利用 Q&A 回答，您将在 Q&A 的视窗中看到答复。谢谢。
Phần hỏi đáp, nếu có câu hỏi cho ban tổ chức, hãy ấn nút Question and Answer Q&A để gửi câu hỏi của mình. Họ sẽ trả lời câu hỏi của bạn trong hộp tin hoặc trả lời trực tiếp câu hỏi của bạn trong cuộc họp. Để gửi câu hỏi, điều số 1, gửi câu hỏi của bạn vào hộp Q&A, ấn Send. Điều số 2, Nên lưu ý, chọn Send Anonymously nếu bạn không muốn tên mình được hiện thị trong hộp Q&A. Điều số 3, nếu bạn tổ chức trả lời qua tin nhắn, bạn sẽ nhìn thấy câu trả lời hiện lên trong hộp Q&A.
Para hacerles preguntas a los organizadores o presentadores, abre la ventana de preguntas y respuestas, en inglés es Q&A, al fondo de la pantalla. Ellos podrán contestar sus preguntas a través de la ventana o en vivo como parte de la presentación. Para hacer una pregunta, escriba su pregunta en el cuadro de preguntas Q&A, presione Send para enviar la pregunta. Una nota selecciona Send Anonymously si no quiere que su nombre aparezca con su pregunta dentro del Q&A. Si el presentador contesta su pregunta, podrá ver la respuesta en la ventana del Q&A.
And sorry, Ana Sofia, before you leave, could you just share the how to get on the line again? I see someone in the chat is looking for Spanish.
Sí, para interpretación en español, si baja al fondo de la pantalla y presiona Interpretation, en inglés, lo cual es interpretación, puedes seleccionar el idioma español y si quieres solamente escuchar la presentación en español, seleccione Mute Original Audio, lo cual pone en mudo el audio en inglés.
咁如果係講廣東話嘅朋友咧，就係話如果你係需要即係話問問題嘅話咧，咁你啱啱咧就係響呢一個翻譯隔離嗰度咧，就有一個咧好似傾偈個符號，咁亦都係英文咧就 Q&A 㗎。咁你點一點嘅時候咧，咁就會有個響你嘅視面啊裏邊咧，你就可以寫低你個問題，咁你可以用中文寫都得㗎。咁跟住如果你想選擇，你可以咧就係佢仲有選擇咧，就係話你可以用你自己嘅名啦，或者係無名咧。都得㗎嚇，咁跟住咧就係咁啲主持人咧就可以睇到你個問題，咁然之後咧我哋咧就盡量我哋嘅能力幫你咧回答你個問題㗎。咁仲有另外咧就係頭先咧有人啱啱咧就係中文咧話睇唔到呢個地球㗎。咁如果你係因為即係話係喺你個畫面嘅右下角裏邊嘅，咁如果你真係咧你喺個電話度揾唔到嘅，你要個畫面睇一睇。如果再睇唔到嘅話咧，你可以出去。然之後咧加翻入去睇下可唔可以見到呢一個翻譯㗎。咁再講一次咧就係中文廣東話咧就係黃黃地色嘅，係寫住 Cantonese 㗎。
Thank you everyone, and it's really important for us to have a multilingual space, and we will be making the recordings available for all the languages. And in addition, if for some reason the closed captioning is not working tonight, we apologize. We're trying to work on it on Facebook, but we will, if needed, try to make a transcript available after the event. So yeah, now we're going to get into our program. So we wanted to start by really grounding us in where we are, right? And what we're doing tonight. So we're going to start with a land acknowledgement that is based on one by the Upstander Project. We acknowledge the sacred land where we work, live, learn, and build community has been a place where people have lived for over 13,000 years. This land is the territory of the Massachusetts, Pawtucket, and their neighbors, the Wampanoag and Nipmuc peoples, who have stewarded this land for hundreds of generations. We recognize the repeated violations of sovereignty, territory, and water perpetrated by invaders that have impacted the original inhabitants of this land for 400 years. We extend our respect to citizens of these nations who live here today and their ancestors who have lived here for over 500 generations, and to all Indigenous peoples. We also affirm that this acknowledgement is insufficient. It does not undo the harm that has been done and continues to be perpetuated now against Indigenous people, their land, and water. Thank you. I also wanted to acknowledge all of the elected officials who are with us tonight. I apologize if I miss anyone, please let me know, but we wanted to begin by thanking all of the elected officials who signed on to our original statement, including Congresswoman Presley, Boston City Councilor Andrea Campbell, Brookline Town Meeting Member Bonnie Bastian, State Representative Dan Hunt, Boston City Councilor Ed Flynn, State Representative Erica Uderhoven, State Representative John Santiago, Boston City Councilor Julia Mejia, Somerville City Councilor Catania Balatin, Boston City Councilor Kenzie Bach, now Boston Mayor Kim Janey, Boston City Councilor Liz Braden, Massachusetts State Representative Liz Miranda, Wakefield Town Councilor Maureen Butt, Boston City Councilor Michelle Wu, and City Council President Nina Liang. We also want to recognize the members of the Massachusetts Asian American Caucus that sponsored this event, co-sponsored this event tonight. Representative Donald Wong, Representative Taki Chan, Representative Paul Schmidt, Representative Roddy Mom, Representative Tram Nguyen, Representative Maria Robinson, and Representative Anna Howard. We also know there are additional officials with us tonight, including the Boston Police Department Civil Rights Division, Norfolk County Sheriff Patrick McDermott, Quincy Mayor Thomas Koch, Boston Chief of Housing Sheila Dillon, State Representative Mindy Dom. I'm sorry, I'm trying to get all the list. State Representative Michael Kushmarek, State Representative Steve Owens, Mary Trung, the Executive Director of the Massachusetts Office of Refugees and Immigrants, Abu Tapin, the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Director of the City of Beverly, State Senator Adam Hines. Apologies, I'm almost on my list. State Representative Dave Rogers, Susan Albright Newton, City Councilor, Yusufi Valley from the Director of the City of Boston Mayor's Office for Immigrant Advancement, Belmont Board of Selectmen member Adam Dash, Cindy Mark, the Chief of Public Protection and Advocacy Bureau at the Attorney General's Office, State Senator Jason Lewis, and Nora Bent, the Executive Director of the Massachusetts Caucus of Women Legislators. We are sure there are more folks here, and we appreciate everyone's support, and feel free to message us and we can do more acknowledgements later. And with that, I want to introduce Sharon Cho, who's going to lead us in a moment of silence and grounding for the folks who lost their lives in Atlanta.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sharon Cho, and as Carolyn mentioned, before we begin our programming, we want to take a moment to remember the 8 lives that were taken in the Atlanta shooting last week, and especially the 6 Asian women we lost to what we know was racialized, gendered violence. I grew up in the Korean immigrant community of Atlanta, and I'm the daughter of a home healthcare worker and an Uber driver. And I am sitting in grief and rage at the violence that we saw in my community last week. All of our community, Asian Americans, women, immigrants, refugees, low-wage workers, queer and trans folks, and all those who experience violence at the hands of white supremacy, capitalism, and misogyny, we are grieving and we are in pain. And as we experience this collective grief and anger, I hope we remember that our healing must also be collective, that we honor these 8 lives through our fight for justice, for a better world where all of us can live with dignity. As we move into the moment of silence, we want to note that we are not sharing the names of the victims to respect the wishes of some of the families who have not given consent to release that information. Please join us in a moment of silence to remember and honor these 8 beautiful lives in all of their humanity, as well as the families impacted. Thank you, everyone. I'm actually now going to pass it over to Tomiko, who will now share a poem as we begin our programming.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, everyone. My name is Tomiko Bayer, and I'm really honored to be helping to open up this space. And I'm going to read a poem from my forthcoming book, Last Days. And before I read it, I just wanted to let everyone know that I've made copies of this book available for free for organizers working on racial justice, climate justice, and economic justice. So if you identify as such, you can sign up for more information in the link that should be dropping in the chat. This poem is called We Are Bodies and Bodies, We Are Stars, and it's a meditation on all of our interconnections. We are bodies and bodies, we are stars. We are shining in the streets and in our homes, our bodies on fire in rage and grief. We are seeds bursting open in fire. We are soaked through to the bone in grief, breathing in grief with every gulp of air. We are soaked through to the bone in rage, breathing in rage with every gulp of air. We move towards each other, hands out and some distance away. We search for how to collapse the distance. We collapse the distance, some of us. Some of us are fighting to remember the ancestral knowledge we carry in our bodies, all of us. The knowledge of how deeply we are connected to every creature, all of us. Some of us don't need to learn this anew. Some of us learned this from our grandmothers and ancestors who held on to the wisdom when white people tried to rip it out, and still they kept this knowledge like breathing. Some of us breathe this connection in every breath and with every step. We're returning to the oceans and the forests, our bodies like waves, our bodies like seedlings. We are like mushrooms connected underground, like birds murmurating, all of us. Because we are breathing, all of us. We are breathing and our blood is running through our bodies, all of us. Our breath travels out of our body, and what was in us reaches someone else's body. We have so little control over this. We are all breathing and sharing our breath. We have become so aware of this. And maybe this is the beginning of something. Maybe this is the beginning of learning how to love beyond the boundaries of ourselves. Maybe this is the beginning of learning how to love beyond the boundaries of our communities. Some of us know this already and are waiting for the rest of us to catch up. Some of us are eager to learn how to love this way. Some of us are terrified to love this way because how vulnerable it is, and so are violently resisting it. Some of us feel exhausted just thinking about it. Some of us are not thinking about it at all. We are all of us doing this, all of us shining, breathing, shining in the streets and in our homes, breathing and shining, breathing and shining.
Thank you, Tomiko. Thank you so much for your powerful poem. In moments like this, when words can be difficult, art and beauty can express what we have a hard time saying. I am Angie Liu, the Executive Director of the Asian Community Development Corporation and a steering committee member of the API's CAN Network, which organized tonight's town hall. I want to welcome everyone to this space and thank you for taking the time to focus on the issue of anti-Asian racism and to move collectively towards systemic change. To fellow members of the Asian American community, we want you to know that we see you, we feel the pain you're feeling, and we grieve like you do. From undocumented families to refugees, from AAPI women and femmes to LGBTQ folks, from Chinatown elders to youth, from nail salon workers to home health care aides, from survivors of sexual harassment to survivors of domestic violence. From Southeast Asians to South Asians, from Muslim Americans to Sikh Americans, we are all part of this diverse community. Our gathering tonight is one of many necessary conversations we must have with one another, but it will not be the last. In the next hour and a half, we will provide some history and context for anti-Asian violence and racism. We will hear solidarity statements from fellow communities of color. We will hear from a panel of community members and organizers. And lastly, we will offer some action steps and resources. Many of us are here tonight because after the horrific targeted murder of Asian women in Atlanta, and after the physical assault Asian elders have recently experienced, our hearts ache in grief and our chests burn in anger, and we feel the urge to do something. I'm sure many of you have also personally experienced racially motivated physical and verbal assaults in the past. But let's remind ourselves that anti-Asian violence and racism are nothing new, just the opposite. This violence is embedded into the very fabric of AAPI history in America. In 1882, the US government enacted the Chinese Exclusion Act that banned Chinese immigration to the US. During World War II, this country rounded up Japanese American citizens and confined them in concentration camps. In the aftermath of 9/11, hate crimes against South Asians and Muslims spiked across the US. In early 2020, former President Trump repeatedly referred to coronavirus as the China virus. And deportation of Southeast Asians continues to this very day, even under the Biden administration. There's also a long history of gendered racism against Asian women. There was the 1875 Page Act that hypersexualized Chinese women as prostitutes and effectively barred them from entering the US. Let us not forget that 20th century US military aggressions in Korea, the Philippines, and Vietnam have led to sexualization and exotification of Asian women's bodies. So none of this is new to us. The latest wave of anti-Asian racism, in fact, never stopped. We have witnessed anti-Asian hate crimes escalate since the beginning of the pandemic more than a year ago.
Thank you, Angie, for that important historical context, which continues to inform our current reality. My name is Angelina Hua, the Dorchester organizer at the Asian American Resource Workshop, one of the core organizations of API's CAN. As we move along with our programming, we want to expand on this question: what is anti-Asian violence? For us, we don't see anti-Asian violence as isolated acts by lone wolves, but a legacy of structural oppression that is as old as the United States. With the rise of reported hate crimes, it's important to acknowledge that there are many more going unreported because structural oppression gaslights us to believe that violence is normal while overworking us to limit our capacity to think beyond survival. And we know this is only the tip of the iceberg. Anti-Asian violence is part of larger structural racism that has historically deprived Asian American Pacific Islanders of resources and security every single day. Through gentrification, the school to prison to deportation pipeline, policing, lack of workers' protection, and more. And it doesn't stop there. The US has a long history of transporting their brand of oppression overseas. For families like mine, it's hard to believe that the US is the land of the free when they have displaced millions of Cambodians, Vietnamese, Hmong, and Laotians during the war in Southeast Asia. My family is here in Boston because they were there bombing and killing my people. The pandemic also unveiled the truth that these systems were designed to adequately support AAPI communities. As neighbors create mutual aid networks to take care of one another, institutions have shown us all the ways our people fall through the cracks time and time again. We know that anti-Asian violence is multi-layered, where it isn't just about your race, but also your class, immigration status, gender, sexuality, age, and ability. It's crucial to understand how different systems of oppression intersect and inform someone's lived experience. In Atlanta, a misogynistic white supremacist targeted spas to murder Asian immigrant women workers because this country continues to objectify and dehumanize Asian immigrant women workers as disposable objects for sexual pleasure and profit. Both the murderer and this country know that violence against Asian women will be held with impunity. To our families and communities, we know that these same Asian women are their families' main breadwinners and caretakers, while bearing the community's burden on their backs. This dehumanization, exploitation, and murder are historical and serve as an ongoing backdrop. And to be clear, these identities aren't the problem. It's actually white supremacy, capitalism, patriarchy, and settler colonialism that exploit and extract our labor and resources to benefit the 1%. In order to fight these systems, we have to work with other oppressed people because we're all fighting for liberation. We need to collectively imagine, create, and cultivate new structures that actually keep us safe, not more policing and incarceration, because it's either freedom for all of us or none of us. And now I'm going to pass it on to our partners to share their solidarity statements on why it's important for us to work together, starting with Tammy Tai, the Deputy Director of at King Boston.
Thank you, Angelina, and thank you everyone who's attending. I'm really humbled and inspired by the numbers we've got here. Again, my name is Tammy Tai. I'm the Deputy Director of King Boston. King Boston envisions a radically inclusive and equitable Boston, where all of us, all our citizens, particularly Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, thrive, grounded in love and well-being. And we stand with you all today in denouncing and working to dismantle twin systems of oppression, white supremacy and patriarchy that were seeded in America over 400 years ago with the arrival of African slaves to these shores, which have grown up together and created a culture that values male white bodies above all others. The thing about white supremacy and patriarchy is that we all suffer. These twin powers try to divide and pit us against one another. They are lie tellers and life takers. And if left unchallenged by truth, justice, and love, they take the life of innocent Asian women. They take the life of unarmed Black men, women, boys, and girls. They take the life of Latinx parents and children at the border, and so many others. Left unchallenged, white supremacy and patriarchy will justify standing against policies that save lives. They will stand against strong gun laws. They will justify standing against healthcare, living wages, and voting rights. Dr. King reminded us that love is our most powerful tool in our long march toward hope and justice. Love is a renewable energy that we must harness, nurture, and freely share. Together, we mourn the loss of our Asian sisters in the same anniversary month that Breonna Taylor was killed, and weeks before the anniversary of Dr. King's assassination. Collectively, we call on our country and our city to face our dark history of hate crimes and racism and take actions that move us towards building the beloved community where we all matter and are cared for. And let us remember the words of Dr. King. Returning hate for hate multiplies hate, adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars. Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. So my hope is that we all stand together in love and solidarity to drive the darkness out with our collective light. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tammy, for your words and for all of the work you're doing. Now we're going to hear from Roxana Rivera, Vice President of 32BJ SEIU.
Good evening, and thank you for inviting me to speak today. I'm honored to be here representing the 175,000 cleaners, airport workers, security officers, and other essential workers that are part of our union, SEIU 32BJ. As a majority Black, Brown, and immigrant union, we stand in unity with the AAPI community. We denounce anti-Asian racism and white supremacy and the insidious cross-section of racism and sexism Asian American women face each and every day. Throughout the COVID pandemic, Too many of those in power have fueled xenophobia and racism against Asians, and that irresponsible rhetoric has had tragic results, from the surge in violent attacks against East Asian elders and the murder of 8 mostly Asian and Asian American women in Atlanta. But anti-Asian racism is not new. It is unfortunately a part of our country's history that we must reckon with and put an end to once and for all. The members of 32BJ SEIU share the trauma and pain of systemic and overt racism and sexism. As Black, Brown, and immigrant people from countries throughout the world, including El Salvador, Morocco, Ethiopia, Haiti, and Nicaragua, our members have been vulnerable to racist attacks and workplace exploitation. Many have temporary protective status and have spent the Trump years fearing the very real prospect of losing that status after living for decades in this country and often raising US-born children. The thousands of women we represent also face sexist, racist stereotypes that hinder their safety, their quality of life, and employment opportunities. These workers have been on the front lines of this pandemic as essential workers, doing jobs that cannot be done from home, and come from majority Black and Brown communities that have been hardest hit by this pandemic and the resulting economic crisis. The global pandemic has impacted all of us, but that impact, like our country, is not equal. This is not right. My message to the AAPI community is this: we at 32BJ mourn with you. We stand with you as working people and as allies, and we are enraged with you. We are committed to turning that anger and pain into action with you. Let 2021 be the year we learn from the inequities this pandemic has laid bare and build toward a future of unity and respect. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roxana, for your words and your solidarity. We're now going to transition into a panel, or kind of a virtual table, right, where folks, women in our community, are going to share a little bit around what they've experienced this year and in this moment and in the long history of anti-Asian racism. And so, yeah, before we move into that, I want to acknowledge a few more elected officials who joined us, including Dr.
多謝下
the Mayor of Framingham,
好幾個
State
即係話
Representative
政府官員啦
State Representative Paul Donato,
，Paul
Summer
Donato 啦
Committee Member Laura Fatone,
，Laura
and
Fatone 啦
City Councilor William Harris.
，William Harris。
I think Melissa might be on the main channel right now. I don't know if anyone else is getting that. Just a flag. Okay, cool. I thank you all for bearing with us, as we move through the multilingual space. So yeah, we're gonna just start by hearing folks' stories, and then we're gonna move more into question and answer. So we're gonna start with May and with Suzanne doing some interpretation and framing, sharing her story as a worker and as a Chinatown worker.
So, 美姐你要開咗 ，OK good。
OK。
而家睇唔到，你要開咗你嘅視頻。
阿肥仔，我邊度開視頻啊？睇啲肥仔。
頭先見到 ，We saw you earlier。
喺邊度視頻？頭先嘅視頻睇到嘛？而家睇到嘛
？Yes good。咁你而家開始講，我同你翻譯。
OK。Hello， 大家好，我叫阿 May Deng， 係新金門嘅負責人。
I'm May Deng. I'm a manager at the new Golden Gate restaurant in Chinatown.
我哋新金門係喺唐人街嘅市中心，我哋係經營廣東風味嘅餐館。我就喺呢間餐館做咗9年，係屬於係家庭嗰啲小生意。
So I've been in this position for about 9 years for our family. We specialize in Cantonese cuisine in Chinatown.
咁我就因為語言嘅問題啦，咁英文唔係咁即係精通啦，咁所以就好中意喺唐人街做工，因為唐人街咧就主要係啲中國人比較多啲。咁2019年嗰陣時咧，唐人街咧就係好熱鬧嘅，係人山人海嘅。
So when we first started this restaurant is because our whole families are limited English speakers. So we have to make a living by opening restaurants in an area where language is not a barrier. So we came to Chinatown and pull our money together and open this restaurant. And at one time, Chinatown was bustling with businesses.
咁從2020年1月24號咧，就中國武漢嗰度封城之後咧，咁就餐館嘅生意咧就開始一落千丈。2月份我哋嘅生意額咧就跌咗50%。咁3月16號咧就因為政府開始唔允許堂食，咁所以我哋3月16號就開始閂門，就直到5月份先可以重開。
So since last year in January, as soon as the words about Wuhan having this virus, that we start feeling a decrease in our businesses. And then later, so by February, our business went down to 50%. By March, when we have a lockdown in our city in Boston, where there's no dine-in option for restaurants, we have to completely close.
咁因為咧就對我哋嘅餐館嘅係非常之大。咁因為咧波士頓咧每年3月份咧就係有個波士頓嘅海鮮展㗎。咁因為呢個展覽咧就中國好多企業都嚟參加，咁啊帶嚟我哋好多生意㗎。咁所以咧我哋2月份咧就準備咗好多個海鮮。咁因為突然間閂門咧，咁所以好多海鮮咧只能夠自己食，咁所以即係呢個疫情閂咗門之後咧，對所有唐人街嘅餐館係損失係非常之大。
So people might not know that every year in March, there is a seafood festival in Boston that attracts a lot of big companies and overseas visitors. And we usually have a lot of guests from China come at that time. So our restaurant have prepared a lot of seafood. And when they shut down the city, everything went to waste. So we lost a lot. Okay.
咁到目前為止咧，咁我哋每個月嘅營業額咧，只係19年嘅25% 啦，即係跌咗75%。咁我哋餐館雖然就唔係好大，咁就細細地啦喺唐人街。咁就以前咧就有20幾個員工，咁依家先係攞翻4、5個，因為嘅生意額跌咗嘅幅度跌咗75%，所以我冇辦法 keep 到咁多個員工啦。咁以前咧，我哋就係從11點開到凌晨嘅4點半，咁依家就係11點之後開到9點半，咁所以嘅時間係差別好大咯。
So our businesses have dropped to right now about 75% what it used to. And we used to have more than 20 workers in our restaurants. We're down to 4. And you can imagine the impact. And we have, we used to open from 11 a.m. to 4:30 a.m. That means the really late shift overnight. But now we're only able to open from 11 to 9.
咁以前咧，我哋就客源咧，只要係靠office 嗰啲員工啦，同埋啲遊客啦，咁就而且好多個非洲裔嗰啲客人啦，同埋西班牙啦、越南啦啲熟客啦，都好多都即係冇人再幫襯咯。所以依家每日嘅堂食咧，只係有10個人左右，咁所以咧呢個生意真係非常之艱難。
So before the pandemic, we have so many different grouping of people that would come to our establishment, from office workers in the downtown area, to families, to a multiracial Blacks, Latinos, Vietnamese, all different kind of families that come to eat in our restaurant. But I haven't seen anybody since the lockdown. And we average about 10 tables a day right now.
咁即係以前 前總統咧一味係講嗰個 China's virus 咧，咁所以一開始呢個coronavirus 開始咧就對唐人街就即係好有偏見，咁所以由上年嚟講對唐人街嘅影響係最嚴重咯。基本上所有嘅餐館咧啲生意咧，起碼最少都跌咗80% 咯。咁如果咁落去咧，唐人街啲租金又咁貴啦，咁我覺得就好多餐館會消失會閂門咯。咁所以我就希望即係疫苗打好之後咧，就啲人有啲信心就翻去唐人街，咁希望就唐人街再熱鬧啲，咁可以希望大家支持下唐人街啦。咁多謝晒。
Since the pandemic, the previous president, they keep calling this a China virus or Chinese virus. It makes a lot of people afraid to come to Chinatown. And it's not just my restaurant, but the entire Chinatown. All the businesses are down at least 80%. And I hope that with people getting vaccinated, that they eventually will come back, because if all the business closed down, we would not have a Chinatown anymore. And thank you for all of your support.
Thank you
so much. Thank you so much, May, for sharing your story, and thanks, Suzanne. And we'll hear more from Suzanne later during the Q&A. Now we're going to invite Joyce into our virtual table to share more about the work she does at the Asian Task Force Against Domestic Violence.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. My name is Joyce Gao. I'm here today on behalf of Asian Task Force Against Domestic Violence. An agency works with domestic violence survivors, especially for those in our AAPI communities. Most of our clients are new immigrants who immigrated to the United States from Asia, who doesn't speak fluent English, have little family support, and not familiar with the system in the United States. They are abused and controlled by their abuser in many ways, from physical, verbal, mental, financial, to many other forms. In an abusive relationship, they are often not allowed to have a voice or making decisions for themselves. A main component of our job is to empower our clients, to help them to regain the sense of control and able to make decisions for themselves. It's a long and sometimes tough process, but also very rewarding when we get to see clients' growth and resilience along the way. However, in the start of this pandemic, we have so many clients reach out to us, express their fear to us again, but this time it's not about the abuser. They discuss with each other on how to be safe in their daily life, telling each other to be careful with transportation because there are Asian people forced to get off a rideshare. They're telling each other be careful of not to wear a mask outside because the news are telling them there are Asian people being attacked by rape just because of their wearing mask. Their sense of control, ability to make decisions in their life is again being weakened during this time, just because who they are, while they're trying to live a normal life like everyone else is doing. They are afraid of being harmed, attacked, or hated. And they ask us, what should we do to protect ourselves? And also, I have a question for myself. What can we do as a member in the community? And before I share my thoughts with you, I would like to share another story with you all. During the pandemic, some of our staff still need to go to the office because of the nature of our work. In an early morning, when one of our staff was walking to work, a random individual holding a toy gun across the street pointed the toy gun to her, while there's no one else on the street. With anger, horror, and sadness, our staff decided to reach out to the police to report this incident. She first called the local police department and was told they're not the right place to call and that she should call 911 instead. She was then transferred to 911, and the 911 operator told her that because she already left the scene where the incident happens, 911 wasn't the right place to call either, and they provide her with the number of the police department, which she just called before. She then called the police again, and at the end was basically told that there isn't much they can do to help her. So our staff ended up having to file a civil complaint online without hearing anything back. So after sharing experience and the story with you all, And this is the story from one of our staff who speak fluent English and understand how to find resources online and knowing the process. I want to circle back the question that we had before. What can we do? Especially with the survivor, the client that we work with that who has limited English and have very little resources. I would like to encourage everyone here to see the importance of having multilingual and culturally appropriate service to the immigrant community and see the importance of the need from the immigrant community. Every single one of us and every voice of us matters. We're not a group that should be seen as statistically insignificant. And thank you all.
Thank you so much, Joyce. And now we're gonna invite Vani to the table. She'll share more, but is in Revere and is gonna lift up the work that folks at Revere Youth in Action are doing.
Thank you, Carolyn. It's quite an honor to be here. I'm Vani, and I am a Khmer kid from Revere and an accidental organizer. I'm a lifelong Revere resident, and I wanted to, before sharing my heart work with you, wanted to just offer that tonight I sit before you in collective grief and collective power. It's easy for us to forget our humanity as we respond to the urgency of the pandemic and the grief that has happened day in and day out. So I wanted to make sure that you see me tonight, I see you tonight. I shared that I'm an accidental organizer, a kid from Revere, because I wanted to tell you the context of the Southeast Asian American community, Southeast Asian community in Revere. I want to give a nod to our Khmer community, the organizers in the mid-'80s and '90s, who were the first to respond to anti-Asian violence. And thank you for AARW for capturing that history. It's so important to acknowledge it in this space because what happened in Atlanta gave me the response of, this is not new. This is not anti-Asian hate only. This is hate against our people. What we're not standing for white supremacy anymore. We're not standing for US imperialism. Yes, we are here tonight to respond to and give testimony to the anti-Asian sentiment. But I know as myself, who's benefited from the oppression of the Black community, to acknowledge that we're not free until all our people are free. And I come from a long line of strong ancestors, the Khmer community in Revere. The love, the organizing that they've done brought me here today. Today, I speak in front of you as the co-director of Revere Youth in Action. We're a grassroots organization that's built, that is focused on building youth power through organizing, through direct education justice services, and more importantly, what I've learned later in life is through working in coalition for social justice. Because the history of Revere Youth in Action was that 8 years ago, our co-founder and 4 high school students pulled together to form in order to bring a community center, a youth center to Revere. We still don't have a youth center. In fact, RIA operates as a youth center without walls. We share a space with our fiscal sponsor. I'm in a Jewish war veterans hall in one of the biggest public housing building in this neighborhood of Shirley Ave. Tonight, I also want to offer just that context, but the hard work that I'm excited to share with you. Our youth are doing amazing work. They recognize that our liberation is tied to the most marginalized of communities. And in order for us to make that change, in order for us to be free, we need to do the work. So some of the work that we're doing and have been doing, and I'm excited to share, is that we have been in a community that has been routinely underlooked, underrepresented. We made sure to help turn out the vote. In this recent special election and primary day, our youth organizers made 9,000 calls out to Revere and Winthrop to turn out for the 19th district primary day. We've recently spoke at the Massachusetts Education Justice Alliance press conference to help support the fully funding of public schools. One of our youth organizers spoke at this conference, talking about the need of more funding for schools and how it has influenced and impacted her life. We had 2 of our organizers recently plan and implement the I Have a Future coalition with a statewide community with young organizers to request from our legislators more funding for youth jobs. We know what that's tied to. And then lastly, we meet with our legislators. One of our most recent success was speaking with Senator Boncory on his support for youth jobs, his co-sponsorship of the Healthy Acts Bill. And after speaking with Revere Youth in Action, Senator Boncory learned about the I Am bill, which is providing menstrual products to within the public. He agreed to co-sponsor. So these are some of the work that the youth in Revere are doing. A youth without youth center, a youth with on a shoestring budget, a youth dealing with the pandemic, a youth from families in a marginalized community, a youth groups that's just trying to get by, and still they have the heart to do the hard work that our elected leaders should be doing. I'm so proud to sit in front of you tonight to share that work, to share the hard work, to share the collective power. And when I was grieving about Atlanta not being able to be a director in the moment, our young organizers held an impromptu vigil to celebrate us, but also to grieve us. That human work, that hard work is so beautiful. And I just want to make sure that tonight, as we talk about the testimonies and the hardships of the anti-Asian sentiment in the pandemic, that I also uplift that hard work. Thank you, Carolyn.
Thank you so much for lifting up the work happening in Revere. And I heard about some bills and some calls to action there. So I hope folks are calling their elected officials, and I hope elected officials on this call are listening to that. And finally, to close out our table, we have Tao, who's gonna share a little bit around the work she's doing in Dorchester, as well as share a video from a community resident. Oh, Tao, 1 second. I think that you might be on the wrong line right now.
We can hear you, Tao.
Oh, it's just me, sorry.
Wait, sorry, 1 second. I'm seeing that I actually can't hear you, Tao. Can you switch to the general line?
So to make our webinar language accessible, it sometimes has little glitches with the interpretation. So if you can't hear, even if you don't think you require interpretation, can you please switch over to the English channel and you should be able to hear the correct audio.
Thanks. And Sophie, is it okay on Facebook? I just want to make sure I don't want to lose Tao's. I'd rather pause now than lose what Tao's saying. Great. If someone just lets us know if for some reason on Facebook it's not working. Cool. Thanks, Tao. Oh, sorry, Tao. People are still saying they can't hear.
Tao, can you drop off and rejoin using Carolyn's link that she can?
I will forward you right now. Thank you everyone for being patient with us. It is important that we are as accessible as possible and that we get this right. So Tao, I'm going to forward you a link right now. Sorry, I'm multitasking. This is real life situation here. Great. We will have you. I just sent that to you. While we're waiting, I will acknowledge a few more elected officials. Councillor Mejia from Boston, Representative Jessica Giannino, Foxborough School Committee member Richard Pearson, Maria McCauley, and State Representative Aaron Michowitz. And we'll just give Tao a moment to rejoin us. And just so folks know, as we have a moment, if you have questions, again, we will not be able to get to all the questions, but we are grouping by theme. So please use this time to add your questions to the Q&A feature, which is one of the options on the bottom of Zoom. We're also collecting questions off Facebook. And thank you, State Representative Jake Oliveira, for being here. Great. Now I see.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me now? Okay, I'll get started then. If there's any audio issues, just let me know. Hi, everyone. My name is Tao. I'm a Vietnamese resident of Dorchester, and I am also the Legal Organizing Fellow with the Asian American Resource Workshop, Greater Boston Legal Services Asian Outreach Unit, and the Vietnamese American Initiative for Development. In my role, I work to support the Vietnamese community by providing legal assistance and building the foundations for community organizing.
I believe that folks need to, if you're on the English, you may need to adjust to turn the interpretation off. Okay. I'm not sure. Are we having issues on the Vietnamese line too? Sorry, I'm kind of looking for direction. Okay, it sounds like the interpreters are having issues. Sophie or Christine, do you have any?
I'm sorry, I'm gonna try and restart the presentation.
We just want to make sure everyone can hear Tao. I'm looking for direction from someone who is not me on this one. Okay, I see.
Cantonese is working.
Great.
Yeah, Tao, can you try to unmute and speak?
Hi, everyone. Can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Can the interpreters hear me too? Okay, I'm seeing an overwhelming yes. All right, but stop me if you don't hear me again. So I'll do my introduction again. Hi, everyone. My name is Tao. I'm a Vietnamese resident of Dorchester, and I also work as the Legal Organizing Fellow with the Asian American Resource Workshop, Greater Boston Legal Services Asian Outreach Unit, and the Vietnamese American Initiative for Development. In my role, I work to support the Vietnamese community by providing legal assistance and building the foundations for community organizing. I work specifically with the Vietnamese community, particularly with an emphasis in Dorchester, and I work closely with nail salon workers in the Vietnamese community and Southeast Asian folks facing deportation. Before I speak a little bit more, I have a few words to share from a community member that I am currently working with on her experiences before and during COVID-19 as a nail salon worker. So she recorded a video for us today, and so I think we can start by playing that video first.
Xin chào mọi người, tôi là một người mẹ đơn thân người Việt. Công việc của tôi là làm nail, tôi chỉ làm chân tay nước 2 ngày cuối tuần ở trong một tiệm nail. Tôi không có làm được nhiều giờ bởi vì tôi không có giấy tờ. Cái nỗi khó khăn nhất của tôi là tôi không có thể nào mà kiếm được một cái việc làm mà có thu nhập ổn định được, bởi vì vấn đề di trú của tôi. Cái nỗi sợ lớn nhất của tôi là không tìm được việc làm, nên sau mùa dịch thì tiệm nail của nơi tôi làm đóng cửa, nên tôi không có đi làm, cũng không có bất kỳ một cái thu nhập nào, và cũng không nhận được cái hỗ trợ tiền nào từ chính phủ liên bang hay hoặc là tiểu bang hết. Tới tháng 7 năm 2020 thì tôi tìm được việc làm ở trong cộng đồng, nhờ được trong cộng đồng giúp đỡ nên tôi tìm được việc làm, nên có thể trang trải được cuộc sống, tiền nhà, tiền ăn, rồi tiền học cho con của tôi. Tháng 3 năm 2021 thì tôi có nghe về cái nạn phân biệt chủng tộc người châu Á đó. Giống như ở bên Atlanta thì là tôi rất là lo sợ, tại vì đối với một người mà không có giấy tờ như tôi, rồi rất khó để tìm kiếm việc làm, tìm kiếm sự giúp đỡ, thì thêm sự phân biệt đối xử, rồi bạo lực, bạo hành, thì tôi rất là lo sợ cho an toàn của bản thân, cho con của tôi, cho những người mà người châu Á sống tại Mỹ.
Do we want to make an interpretation announcement before I continue? Okay, I'll just continue then. So thank you for playing that video. In my work, I have seen that many of the community workers I work with share similar lived experiences in the United States as low-wage Asian immigrant women workers, such as the worker that just shared her story with us. And they identify with the surging fear as a result of heightened anti-Asian violence during the COVID-19 pandemic. But fear is not a new feeling. And I think many of us have already touched on this, but for the community members I have worked with specifically, fear is a constant presence in their lives, way before the pandemic even started, because of the structural violence they encounter in their day-to-day lives, from gentrification to deportation to issues with language access and so much more.
Tao, I'm sorry to jump in again, but we're having a problem with the interpretation again. Could I ask you to try and rejoin again? You should have received a new link to your email.
Okay, I will try joining again.
Sorry, we just want to make sure that people in all the language channels can hear.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, everyone. And we will, I know folks are asking, we will be sharing the resources we've compiled, as well as we'll add some of the resources that folks are sharing with us in the chat to the document, and we'll share those in a follow-up email, as well as next steps and ways folks can get involved.
Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Okay, I'm once again seeing an overwhelming yes. But if I have any issues, just let me know and cut me out. Okay, so we had just listened to one of the community members I'm currently working with, who graciously shared her story with us tonight. But in my work, I have seen that many of the community members I work with identify with her experiences as a low-wage Asian immigrant woman worker. And she speaks a little bit to the surging fear as a result of the xenophobia and the anti-Asian violence that has occurred during the pandemic. But fear is not a new feeling for our community members. And many of us have already touched on this, but fear for the community members is a constant presence in their lives, way before the pandemic even started, and because of the structural violence that they encounter in their day-to-day lives. As mentioned earlier, from gentrification to deportation to issues with language access, and so much more. And they are workers who do not have the privilege of a stable income and work from home options. So in the midst of a global pandemic, when people are worried about coming into contact with one another, they must sacrifice their health and safety every day in order to put food on the table for the next day. And these systems are also the same systems that harm other immigrant communities and communities of color. But while low-wage Asian immigrant women workers are at the front lines of our economy, they also live in the margins of our society. For the nail salon industry, an industry whose workforce is predominantly Asian immigrant women and femmes, we see structural violence occur around and within the nail salon space. And this violence comes in so many forms, from influencers on social media who profit off of mocking nail salon workers' accents, to customers refusing to pay after receiving all of their services because of the devaluing of immigrant labor, to wage theft issues within the nail salon space itself. And now they have to juggle anti-Asian violence at a much higher rate while working late hours, forced to take public transportation home, and even feeling this anxiety to the point where they feel like they have to lock the salon doors during operating hours until they see a customer walk up to the salon. Others face the looming threat of deportation that may rip them away from their families, their loved ones, and their communities. There are single mothers who are trying their best to support their children. They are our community leaders. They are our caretakers, people who may not have even stepped foot in the country that they face deportation to. And these community members have criminal investment offenses due to the disinvestment in their neighborhoods when resettling in the United States, as a result of policies that also targeted Black and Brown communities. And after experiencing trauma and war in Southeast Asia. And they are people that have deep roots in the United States since their deportation order. Yet state violence against Southeast Asians does not acknowledge this. Just this past month, the Biden administration deported 31 Vietnamese community members from across the nation in the midst of a global pandemic, despite a supposed 100-day halt on all deportations. So anti-Asian violence is not new for our communities. Yet community members that I'm in contact with know they can't access the resources that are available to folks who are more privileged, such as benefits provided during the pandemic. And many people may point to the police as a resource during this period of heightened anti-Asian violence. But I see differently in our day-to-day experiences. Just recently, a community member, an attendant, came into our office asking for assistance. He had recently been in an altercation with his landlord that resulted in him being pushed down the stairs by his landlord. And so the tenant called 911 for assistance. But instead, the tenant ended up being arrested, not the landlord. And this was because the landlord spoke English while the tenant could not advocate for himself in English. And this is almost always the case when there is an incident between someone who is not a proficient English speaker and someone who is. And people in our households can identify the situation because many of our parents, our elders, and our community members also deal with language access issues on their day-to-day lives. And Southeast Asians in particular know that many of our community members are facing deportation because of their interactions with the criminal legal system. So as we think towards the future, We need to think about what we can do to reinvest in immigrant communities and communities of color so that change is truly transformative. In the short term, this means an equitable COVID recovery plan that protects all workers of all identities, and that includes providing housing stability, safety despite immigration status, food security, and workers' protections. And it means providing relief for undocumented workers through grassroots initiatives like the Asian Community Emergency Relief Fund, which provides funding to low-wage Asian immigrant workers who cannot access benefits or relief. But in the long term, it means protecting our communities and building long-term infrastructure for people like low-wage Asian immigrant women workers. I'm excited to share that Greater Boston Legal Services Asian Outreach Unit and the Vietnamese American Initiative for Development will soon be launching a report that centers the experiences of nail salon workers and owners in the upcoming months. And what we've seen through our work on this report is that there is a true need in our communities to establish worker centers with full-time organizers who can actually engage with community members. And there is a need to actually uplift more narratives and support our communities in developing worker co-ops that can support more equitable ownership of their workplaces. So with all of this, I want to leave off by saying that all of us here are part of a larger community, and we all have a part to play in uplifting those most marginalized in our immigrant communities and communities of color, including nail salon workers and Southeast Asian folks facing deportation. Anti-Asian violence has surged as a result of the pandemic, but it is not new. And addressing the root causes of anti-Asian violence is the key to uplifting whole communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Tao. And as we transition into the question and answer section, where we're going to add some more folks in, including Tao, you'll still be on. I just wanted to say that I think given just the natural technical difficulties, we are probably going to
因為呢一個嘅
45. And if you do need to leave early, the recording will be available on Facebook, and we will send the link in a follow-up, and really encourage folks to watch that, because at the end we will be sharing some specific policies that we're uplifting in this time. So just wanted to make that housekeeping announcement, because I don't want to cut us totally off from this part. Great. Well, welcome everyone. I think most folks were introduced, but for the folks who weren't, maybe when you answer your first question, if you can introduce yourself a little bit so folks know who's here. So yeah, let's jump into some questions. Maybe we can start with this for Bethany, and then we'll go into a question that kind of anyone can answer. So Bethany, to kick us off, there's been a lot of talk about strengthening hate crime legislation, and just curious for you to share more about what kind of legal solutions you feel like would be most impactful for our communities.
Sure, thanks, Carolyn. So my name is Bethany. I'm at Greater Boston Legal Services in Asian Outreach, and it's really incredible to have so many people trying to get at the root of this problem and thinking about what solutions are necessary to keep our families and communities safe. Accountability to our community is so important, and for too long, Asian Americans have suffered from discrimination and violence, and people are angry as a result. Asian Americans have been invisible in this country for as long as we've been here, or we're considered foreigners. And we've seen this stereotype play out during the pandemic. So this national conversation that we're having on racism is critical to what it means for this country to be responsive to communities of color, whether we're talking about the murder of George Floyd or the shootings in Atlanta. So what does justice look like if we talk about hate crime legislation? Is our community safe? Does the conversation end there? It's been really interesting for me to learn from policies all over the country. Oakland City Council, for example, is trying to fund more community ambassadors on streets. And based on our close collaboration with community organizations in legal services, I would say that community-based solutions and the expertise of community members and all the groups that you've heard speak tonight, and the many who are co-sponsoring this event, are critical to any discussion about how to make our community safer. Health and safety in our communities doesn't involve only law enforcement or only one answer. And we need long-term solutions that create structural change to make our communities safer. We need policies for low-income housing and community control of land. We need quality public education. We We need to make sure that there's language access in all government agencies. We need immigration policies that keep families together and don't demonize our communities. We need to increase economic support and stable jobs. Those are the types of legal solutions that will keep our community safe. And creating change in the entire system is what it means to have a safe neighborhood. And what we've seen during this pandemic and this time of crisis is that the community has turned to the trusted or community organizations time and time again to make sure that they're safe. Whether we're talking about accessing unemployment insurance or rental assistance or emergency funding, it's community-based organizations who have been on the streets and on the front lines every day and have to be part of the solution, whatever we're talking about, legal or otherwise.
Thanks, Bethany. I think that's really helpful context as we think about kind of how to address this moment, right? I feel like, you know, we did a good job, I think, centering this moment and lifting up some of the history, but I wonder if Professor Wu, you could just share a little more around the history of the model minority myth and how we see that kind of playing out when we think about Asian American communities.
Sure, I will try. Thanks, Carolyn. My name is Jean Wu, let me just jump right into I think it's almost very common for whenever the term Asian American gets mentioned, immediately sometimes the thing that comes out of people's mouths is model minority. And I think it's important to understand this as the model minority is not something that Asian Americans chose for ourselves or created for ourselves, but is a stereotype. It's a controlling image that was created and imposed on us. The most recent appearance of it is towards the in the 60s because of actually at a moment when the civil rights movement was gaining traction in the sense of having a larger community, people in beyond sort of Black community and communities of color understand that structural changes are needed in this society. And it was a time when Asian Americans, and in a minute I'll say why, became the group that was used to, in a sense, discipline all the voices, including progressive and radical Asian Americans themselves. Was a controlling image that was used to discipline everyone by saying, and this is how the stereotype goes, most of you know, that if Asian Americans, even though they too have had, you know, hard times in the US and so on, if they are able to do well and succeed, it shows that we don't need structural change. That is to say, the system as it is in the US works perfectly well. And if you all just stop whining, yelling, work harder, do like the Asians do, and you too will succeed, right? And I think what is unknown behind all of this is that the issue is that the model minority is not about Asian Americans as much as it is about a way to discipline other groups and to say we don't need any change. There was and most people who even use the image of model minority, I think, don't realize that two things I think really fed into the situation. One is that at the moment when Asian Americans when this was imposed on us, Asian Americans had been through the years, because of structural systemic racism and silencing, had been scared, had been terrorized into silence. Particularly if you think about the 60s, it was coming off of Japanese American incarceration and also in the Cold War, surveillance of Chinese American communities. And it was really a moment when Asian Americans didn't have, the community was still very small and didn't have voice. And also new Asian immigrants, post-65, most people know about the 1965 Immigration Act. Most people also don't understand that the immigration policies targeted right? Groups, Asians who had education and who could bring resources into this country. Very, very uneven. It wasn't as if immigration was open to everyone. So in some sense, what was then termed as, look at these Asian Americans, right? They seem to be doing, so they are doing, not just seem, they are doing so well compared to other people. Why can't everyone be like them? So I think that it's important to understand that history so that whenever this idea, this concept of Asian of minority comes, we are able to understand that it's a ploy, it's some other power dynamic is happening here. And for us to be able, right, to push back and to say, this is something that is imposed and used. And most times it is to pit one group against another. It is about pitting, in a sense, it is not only just pitting, I think, Asian Americans as minority against other groups of color, to say, why don't you all just, stop fighting, stop whining and complaining and get with the program. It also, from the get-go, has been a concept that is used to also control or pit Asians against white working class, right? So that in a sense, what that does is to create a situation where the Asian American body is seen as the like a punching bag. It's for anybody who is, it's used as whatever resentment and upset that you have about economic and political situations. This is a group that often gets targeted. So I see this happening very much. And in this case, most recently, when there's a pandemic, when things are, when economically, socially things are in disarray, it's important to get a scapegoat. And this is exactly how it was used, just as it was used, just as why Japanese Americans were incarcerated because of Pearl Harbor, right? This idea that the country itself cannot manage some crises. And so here's a scapegoat. So that's how I see it tied into this particular moment.
Mm-hmm. Thanks so much, Jane. And now, one issue we haven't touched on so much yet tonight, but I think has been something we've been talking about a lot recently is education. So Suzanne, I was hoping you could share a little bit more around, I'm just reading this question, said, my question is about people of color being pitted against each other. I deeply appreciate the solidarity here. How can we make sure to take this with us, particularly when it comes to education and education outcomes, and the way different groups have been pitted against each other in this moment. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about what's going on in that space.
Well, I'm going to talk, so my name is Suzanne Lee. I'm a retired Boston Public School teacher and principal, but I'm going to talk about public education in general of this question, because my first teaching job was during the first year of busing. And so I have seen the ups and downs of public education. That's always moments of crisis that really pit one group, like what Jean said, one group against the other. But if you look at who actually use public education now, is predominantly people of color and predominantly the working class. Because the middle class and people with means, even among our community, they have many options. So they go to charter school, they go to private school, or they go to medical. So what we have in urban education is that you're dealing with students who come from backgrounds that don't have a lot of means. The parents cannot support them because they're busy surviving. It does not fit the mold of what people call good students. So unless the schools have resources to really meet where students are at and lift everybody, we are not going to see that change. So it's not a question of Asian students are smarter or Asian students and white students are on this side, they have good test scores, and Black and brown on this side. Why can't they all, you have the same teacher, why don't you get the same? Well, you know what? We didn't all start out together in the same plane. And when you look at how society since the 70s, 60s, since they have transformed, the structure, the institution that used to be there to support families are basically gone. You don't have any more, particularly in the Black community, you don't have too many groups or, you know, I hear comments from folks that we used to just hang out in this, the doorstep, and the whole street would be there, and you learn how to raise your child, you learn about things from the elders. Well, we don't have that situation anymore. And the churches, the number of people that actually attend churches when they get a lot of information and learn how to support each other, that numbers is also shrinking. So what you have left is what I've seen over the years, that most of my poor working class folks, they all have the same issue, that there's not enough resources to support children getting to where they need to be. And that's what we're seeing. And then for the Asian families, and we're not talking about our Asian families either. If you look at the Boston Public School, the majority, we're talking about two groups, the Chinese immigrants and the Vietnamese immigrants. And they both of those center in a few very large schools. So if they do well in those few large schools, then the whole group does well. They're not scattered everywhere. So first we have to look at what are the schools doing, that if children actually get what they need to support their learning, everybody would get there. So we cannot be pitting one group against the other. Why don't you look at so-and-so? Well, you don't come from the same background. And in all my 35 years of education, I have never met any parents from any ethnic group that don't want the same for their children. Is that to be able to do better than them? But we are fighting against, that's one step, because so many Black folks in our city, particularly in urban city, have such bad experience with public education as they were growing up. There's a trust factor. So you have to get over that, and really people in education have to reach out and show that you have their children's education at heart. Until you do that, you're always going to be fighting against, they have a question mark. Are they really there for me? So that translates to children not listening either. So don't underestimate that. Whereas in the Asian families, the culture is that listen to your teacher, the school know best. But for people who have been here a long time, that's not true, because they had bad experience with public educations and they want to push for that change. And I think eventually a lot of the Asian Americans would get to that point. But right now, many of them still trust the school. But I'm starting to hear people and say, why aren't they doing this? Why aren't they doing that? So that's going to come. And that's when the time that, so we as educators and community organizers have to help people to understand, and that history, that we are all in it together. And until our children get what they need to reach their potential, none of us, we can argue all we want. Things are not going to improve.
Yeah, thank you, Suzanne, for that breakdown. And it's certainly, you know, both has deep historical roots, and right now, right, we're seeing it play out, particularly for those of us who are in Boston. I guess, you know, one question I wanted to throw out to the whole group is, I think that throughout this year, and certainly in this moment, there's been a lot of questions around solidarity across communities of color, and particularly between Asian communities and Black communities, right? We've seen lots of dynamics around this, and I guess folks are really wondering, like, how do we understand that, and what can we do to create more solidarity and more unity? And I'm just going to throw that out. I think it's a big question. We're not going to answer fully tonight, but if anyone has any initial thoughts they want to share.
Well, I wanted to, I just finished talking. I don't want to dominate it. But building solidarity with other community is going to take all of us. And we do have to intentionally building understanding and create situation where people come together. And I have examples of that, and I've seen that happen, like in Castle Square, that built a really dynamic, multiracial Black and Chinese speaking tenants organization that have won praise nationally. Is the national model. They now own 51% of the whole complex. They cannot get that unless they come together and work together. And when they do that, all the misconception, misunderstanding goes down to the background. And we do have to accept and see and listen to our elders. A lot of time, what they see in the street, that the violence against them are from young Black and brown boys. And we cannot put that aside, that it doesn't happen. Of course it happens, because people live in, we share space of poverty, and you're going to have those situations, right? So we cannot not see it, but figure out ways how to come together to address the root cause. And we have to be intentional about it. And it takes years. So you cannot be here one day and gone the next and expect things to change. So we need to think deeply.
Thank you. Yeah, Jean, if you want to jump in, and then I don't know if Tao, from growing up in Dorchester, if you have anything you want to add after.
We should, maybe we should let Tao go first. You've heard my voice already. Let Tao go first.
Okay,
come back to me. Come back to me. Tao, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, sure. I can speak a little bit to my experiences. I think I talked a little bit earlier about how Dorchester is a hub for the Vietnamese community, but I also want to acknowledge the fact that Dorchester is such a multiracial, multi-ethnic community, not just for the Vietnamese community, but there are many folks who speak Haitian Creole. There are many folks who identify as Latinx. And there are many folks who are also white residents in Dorchester as well. All this to say that, there is a lot of organizing on the ground already that is building solidarity across these racial lines. I've been to many housing organizing events where interpretation is constantly simultaneous and in so many different languages. And it's so inspiring to hear that in one space. I mean, back before we were like in quarantine, you could see all the interpreters moving at the same time and folks communicating with each other across language lines. And I think also that, I think folks have touched on this already, but when we work together and fight together, we win our struggles. And part of this means that we need to have more conversations across racial lines. And we also, as community members, need to be more involved in each other's lives, whether that means being involved with organizations that are already working with various communities on the ground, or thinking of ways how we as community members can actually support and uplift other communities' narratives.
Jean, do you want to jump in? Thanks.
Sure. Sure. I'll jump in, and I'll try to make it really quick. I think when things happen, this is a pattern that happens. When things happen, we sort of all react to something, and I think unfortunately the usually what really creates change is slow. As Suzanne was saying earlier, it takes time. It's not something that happens overnight that you can build or get together. One of the things I was going to say is also slow, but and we're already way slow in doing this, is that we have to begin to pressure our education systems, right, to teach all the stuff that is left out, all of our histories, all of our realities, and the things that are a lot of things that are omitted, things are sanitized in terms of what real experiences are. Because if we do not know our own and one another's histories, our intersections, our realities, the structural, only when you look at the experiences of different marginalized groups and oppressed groups together can you begin to see how the structure, how a white supremacist structure works and pits people against one another and keeps things in place. So if you don't give that overall education, right? Sometimes there's like education about one group or something else, but we need to really go to the basics and say to really pressure schools from the get-go, primary school all the way through, to begin to demand that this kind of education is required as reading, writing, arithmetic. You know, I mean, would we think that our kids now don't need computer science or something? No, of course not. You're going to put the money into that and all that. But somehow when it comes to learning about histories that are long erased, realities that are sort of hidden, we don't do it, right? We leave people to flounder. So I think a lot of pressure has to go into it, a lot of work, but again, it takes time, but we need to start like yesterday.
Thanks, Jean. And I'm gonna, Suzanne and then Bethany.
Because I saw in the chat where somebody mentioned that, does that mean the Asian community is going to support the Black community now? I want to respond to that. Some of us has been doing this for 40 years. Okay, so it's not new that so look at who's here. All the young folks who grew up here understand that. But our community, but we are also, I don't say victim, but we are the recipients of what have not been taught to us. But we also, the immigrants who come to this country is also been fed all the misinformation. So they already come with a certain view. So we have to undo all that. So it's up to all of us to educate each of our own community. And to say that you don't have stereotypes about another group that you don't know that much, that's fooling yourself, because we all been fed all that education. So we have to check ourselves too. But if we strive to work together to really listen and not be so quick to judge, I hope we can get there.
And then to add to what Suzanne is saying, I haven't been doing the work for 40 years, maybe soon enough. But I mean, I think it is in our work that we have seen those instances of cross-racial solidarity, right? When we are working on deportations, when we're talking about how prisons lead to a deportation pipeline, that affects not just Southeast Asian and communities, that affects communities of color across the board. When we talk about public education and language access, and we talk about making sure that there's equity in schools and the discrimination that students face, that is something that affects all communities. And so where we are able to make sure that those issues are connected, as well as making sure that our communities are understanding each other on those issues, that's so incredibly important, right? Like we search out opportunities where when we're representing restaurant workers, we're not representing just the Asian American restaurant workers, but we are representing Latinx workers too, right? And I've represented multiple workers in cases where there are those cross-racial lines. And so the more we do that, and also the more people know that that's happening, right? I mean, part of it is that the mainstream media, in terms of what Suzanne was saying, doesn't feed you those images of cross-racial solidarity. They tell you that Asian people don't like Black people and Black people don't like Asian people, right? Like that's what mainstream media wants you to hear. And so the more you search for those stories that dig a little deeper, the better it would be.
Yeah, absolutely. And even with, Bethany, that last example, I think, and what Tao was saying, right, in our work in Dorchester, we're organizing buildings, 3-deckers that have Black families and Southeast Asian families, because people live side by side, right? In all the ways that's challenging and builds shared experience, right? And on the deportation work, we see the same gang database that led to criminalization of Southeast Asian community members that leads to their deportation now being, almost all Black young men who are now getting profiled and incarcerated in the same system. So we understand the systemic roots, as well as the need to build these relationships and build this understanding. Yeah. So the one other big question that I think we're not going to get to, but I think Karen will speak to in the end, is really folks are asking, as allies, as accomplices to the Asian American community, what can we do? And so, you know, I just really want to invite folks in that this is the beginning of a conversation, and there is much more to be done, and it is lifelong work, right? And we hope that you will be part of a movement with us to end these systems that we are all having to live under, right? So we're going to get to that hopefully a little bit in the end and in the follow-up. But I did want to ask Joyce, you know, if there's anything particularly from the work you're doing on any of these questions that you wanted to just lift up.
Thank you, Carolyn. But I think I'm just really amazed and just learn from each other, learn from all the panelists, because I think I agree with all you say. I think they're so just all very well said. I don't think anything needs to be added from my end, and just, you know, thank you for all the works that everyone has been doing.
Yeah, well, thank you all for this very short beginning of a conversation. I think it was really fruitful. And we're gonna move to Karen to do a little bit of closing. And please stay with us, folks. I know we're a little behind, but we're really gonna dig into some of the policy pieces that we're pushing around equitable recovery and to fight against racism.
Well, thank you, Carolyn. And I don't know about you. I have heard most of the people on the panel many times. I'm like really, you know, paying attention. And maybe my first call to action is for people to stretch a little bit, right? We have a lot of work ahead of us. So, you know, really, and want to thank you, all of the viewers, you know, that are still here, close to 2,000 of us. And it really shouldn't take a crisis for us to get together. And we really want to use this moment to build an even stronger movement for social justice, racial justice, and solidarity that we talked about, you know, many times throughout today. And we will also want you to plug into existing work, like the example that Suzanne talked about in Castle Square. Not many of us heard about it. You know, it was amazing work, you know, that many, many years of work by many, many organizers. So I would walk through some of the things that you can do right now in this legislative session. What can you do? So we are, you know, advocating for policy that will promote data equity and data disaggregation. To tackle any sort of social issues, we have to have useful and accurate data. And this is something that healthcare advocates and educators been advocating for decades. So we're hoping that this year we'll pass the data equity bill. And you can see on the screen the bill number. So there's a lot of bill numbers. So I suggest that for you to take a picture for all of it, and we will also email it to you as well. And we have been talking about, you know, the importance of equitable recovery, you know, through jobs, housing, and other social safety nets. You know, there's a COVID-19 Housing Recovery Act that we will need everyone's support to pass, tenant option to purchase, to help tenants to stay, and also build collective community wealth, rent stabilization. We also will continue to need funding for affordable housing. We need to stop, you know, wage theft. There's multiple bills on all of these issues. And then there's also a bill to establish a curricula for Asian American studies, you know, in K-12 and higher education. There's a driver license bill for all. It's the Massachusetts Working and Mobility Act. This will get, you know, help people to get back to work and get to work safely. We need to increase language access at all levels of government. And then if we are promoting any sort of new, you know, legislations, it will be really important to have increased input and collaboration with community organizations and stakeholders. So we really encourage you to call your elected officials to advocate for these policies, to get involved in one of the organizations that's today, so that you are fighting for long-term change. And you can also donate to the Asian Community Emergency Relief Fund. And this is particularly for the AAPI community and for people who cannot access public assistance. And then also you can donate to any of the community-based grassroots organizations, maybe organizations you don't hear so much about, but have been doing a lot of important work because they didn't have time to advertise, their accomplishments. So, so we want you to, there's a lot of questions, right, around kind of like, oh, are there any other vigils that are happening? We know that throughout Massachusetts, there are a lot of different vigils happening. We encourage you to attend these vigils, and we also want you to continue to build mutual support, to build community, so that everyone's everyday need are met, so that when we all start, living dignified lives, then we can really tackle, a lot of the big societal issues. So, and then like Carolyn said, this is not the last time we'll have a conversation. So we hope to continue to hear from you and to work with you on crisis prevention and crisis intervention. And so we look forward to your partnership. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen, for those calls to action. And we hope that everyone can commit to calling about one of those bills or looking at one of those resources tomorrow or making one donation tomorrow, because there is so much to be done, but we all can do our part as part of a bigger movement and build the kind of change we need. So I just wanted to say a few thank yous before we go into our closing performance. Big thank you to our interpreters tonight, and for everyone for being patient with us and communicating with us around the interpretation. And we just do want to apologize again that we weren't able to make the closed captioning work. We will commit to trying to get a transcript of this event done next week and to share that back out. So our apologies, because we know we had communicated that access need. So yeah, just to thank the interpreters, thank everyone who was involved, and I just wanted to thank the Asian women and gender nonconforming people who led this event. We know that violence occurs at the intersection of race, gender, class, and immigration, and we also know that we're all in this struggle together. So thank you to everyone who shared tonight. So we're just going to close with a final performance. So I'm gonna kick it over to Micah for their performance. Thank you for closing us out.
Thank you so much, Carolyn, and thank you everyone who has joined us tonight. My name is Micah. I use they, them pronouns. And as a queer and trans Filipinx person, I know and experience the power of chosen family, our powers of love, defense, and accountability. We keep us safe. In the wake of violence, I turn to manifesting the communities and actions that dismantle harm at its roots while building ecosystems of care. I want to remind us to honor our power, our beauty, our joy. Tonight, I am sharing a new original poem, and I want to name that many of its images are rooted in memory more than our current pandemic realities. I'm dropping a transcript in the chat for access and a link to the inspiration behind this poem. With that, I begin with a prayer. Praise to Auntie, full of grace. A Lord has nothing on you. Blessing are you, and blessed is the fruit of the worlds you seed. Powerful Auntie, parent of change, party with us and conjure your magic now, so really we'll never die. Glory be to this. New kinship, activating sacred verbs, remembering ourselves to each other. Shanawa. This is a poem to aunties after Alan Pelaz Lopez and Critical Auntie Studies. To auntie with no eyebrows, penciling a fierce curve practiced over decades, who shimmies in the kitchen yelling about capitalism and ready to fry tempura for the protest potluck. To loving rage auntie, wielding a wooden board in the face of hate, then donating $1 million back to her community. To octopus bruja auntie, alchemizing cement into dance floor, tentacling a kid on their hips while they swivel like this and salsa with an infant on their left. And then there's like 3 other kids wobbling around them. You just gotta see auntie. To mix candy in the purse auntie, who sees more than any oracle, who makes sure the girls get home at the end of the night, who keep a key for you under the porch plants and a baseball bat beside the front door. To pink-haired good karaoke auntie, slipping you chismes and cash when your mama isn't looking. To Miss Auntie with the mascara and platform flip-flops like you have never seen, who was there in my 4th year of life and taught me how to math and tell stories and how to zip a sedan between your boyfriend's house and the boba shop, showing me how to hold the gold glamour of our skin. To auntie entrepreneurs with the hair salons and the laundry room, where I loved the posters of women who looked like us, Asian Aphrodites of all ages, Venusing out of soap suds and cerulean disinfectant. To permed up auntie who carry a fresh plate of everything from the kitchen table, asking, have you eaten yet? A question so rhetorical I answer, mahal kita, te quiero también, I love you too. To werewolf auntie with the extra cigarette outside the club, howling to the moon until dawn turns her to machete auntie, cutting fresh coconut off the tree and baking the best bibinka on the block. To auntie who know what syllables to rattle and when, who know how to shake the bones, sing the dirt, awaken our wounds so we may heal something as ancestral as sovereignty back into our mothers and motherlands. We are vessels of borrowed earth the earth borrows into. We call us womb, we call us sister, we know us goddesses of many fertilities. Call us Aswang and Cyborg, the monsters who will tear down empire with forked android tongue, licking new life from disaster, and split torso, piggybacking futures over oceans and borders. To aunties weaving Eden in any garden they walk through, growing miracles with eggshells and watering cans carved out of any plastic around, who don't throw away a thing, living libraries of so much more than just knowledge. To aunties moving medicines outside of medical, soups like potions and potions tasting better than soup, spells scribbled on paper and taped to foreheads of Lolas who lace their neck with a copper spiral and vial of Lolo's ashes. To badass tarot deck astrology auntie who teach us how to find pleasure in ourselves and our sex again. Auntie with the real good lingerie. To frontline worker, farmer, artist, and doctor aunties in any field. To small business owner auntie and massage parlor auntie, auntie whose labors I can list but do not fully know, who speak our languages out of extinction. To every auntie fighting myriad extinctions, to the long lineages of uproarers and revolutionaries, names we know and names we don't, names erased and mispronounced out of history, names unwritten, but names that can live in the oral memory of our mouths. May we honor our aunties' names and powers now. Tonight, I invite you to speak the names of aunties in your life and put voice or thought or writing to what makes them powerful. Thank you.
Thank you, Micah, and thank you everyone for joining us. Have a good night, everyone. And I hope you're sitting with these words and with the action and our collective grief and our collective power. Have a good night, everyone.